My name is Kayla Rosenberger, and this is my presentation of my social psychology experiment of observation versus familiarity. I chose this experiment because I worked for Starbucks for a brief period of time, and one of the general tasks the baristas are expected to perform is to help make customers aware of new products. And I always wondered whether new customers or recurring customers would notice new products more. So I created this experiment because I was curious to see if there was a correlation between how familiar a person is with a particular setting and how observant they are within that setting. Based on personal knowledge I gained through working at Starbucks and conversing with the familiar customers that frequented that location on a daily basis, I formed the hypothesis that people who are more familiar with a particular setting will be more observant because they have formed schemas related to that setting and would be more likely to notice changes. To begin my experiment, I went to the local Starbucks, bought a coffee, and came up with 3 questions concerning things that could be easily observed by customers while standing in line. The 3 objects I chose were a series of 4 cups displayed prominently on a shelf, a painting of cars with the word Cadillac written on it, and a large collage of photographs featuring a woman wearing a white headscarf. I then spent the next few days asking people about these 3 objects as they were leaving, and also about the frequency of their visits to that particular Starbucks. Here are my questions and the responses I received from 3 people that I interviewed.
I come probably once a week.
Sometimes.
Not very often. Gosh, I don't even remember the painting.
I didn't notice a painting on the wall.
Couldn't tell you. Oh, 5?
I would be guessing if I said 5.
No idea. Yes, she's wearing something on her head.
I didn't notice the photograph.
Couldn't tell you.
I interviewed dozens of people, and the results that I got back surprised me. As you can see from this chart of responses to the question about the painting, only 22% of people who very often visited that Starbucks gave the correct answer, but 60% of people who hardly ever visited answered correctly. Interestingly enough, many people told me that they only noticed the painting next to the one I asked about, which featured a Parisian garden. In this next chart, showing the responses to the question about the cups, the pattern continues. Only 33% of people who very often visited that Starbucks answered correctly, whereas 80% of those who hardly ever visited came back with the correct response. In both of the shown charts, 50% of people who sometimes visited that Starbucks gave the right answer, and 50% answered wrong or didn't remember the cups at all. Finally, in this last chart are shown the responses to my question regarding the woman in the photograph. The answers here really surprised me because that photograph is one of the largest, most prominent objects in the store. Once again, only 33% of people who very often visited that Starbucks answered correctly, but 60% of people who hardly ever visited gave the right answer. Even among the people who visited sometimes, only 17% gave the correct response. At the end of each interview, I asked people what they thought the reason was why they did or didn't notice the things I asked about. Here are just a couple of the responses I received.
I'm in the construction business, and I looked at every joint that was in the ceiling. I could tell you about what was behind the cash register. I could tell you about those things. I did not look at any of the aesthetic finishes.
Well, I noticed that the baristas' aprons were green, but I did think they were black. You know, it crossed my mind. I think maybe that was a guess. I think because it's not part of what I do every day. I'm an event planner, and I pay attention to the way things are served and maybe how the food looks and not necessarily the surroundings. Plus, I've been in this Starbucks many times before, and I don't think I'm as observant as if I were in some place for the first time. So if you go into some place for the first time, you're looking around more, you're looking to see where you are, what do they have, what's on the menu, what does it look like, oh look what they did, how they did this, how they did that. But when you go into some place over and over again and repeat it, you already think you know where everything is. And it might have to take something a lot more obvious to make you pay attention than it is.
I originally hypothesized that people who are more familiar with a particular setting would be more observant in that setting than people who are unfamiliar with it. Through this experiment, I proved my hypothesis was incorrect, and that in fact the opposite was true. People who were unfamiliar with the setting noticed much more than those who were familiar with it, and I believe this was due to the fact that those who very often visited that Starbucks had already formed schemas about the setting, and therefore their minds deemed the observation of the space as unimportant. This concludes my presentation of observation and familiarity, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you!